Welcome to the Rescue One podcast. Each week, we talk about challenging the way we do business in the fire service when it comes to mental and physical health. I believe there's a better way to do it, and I want to bring in experts that can teach us exactly how and why we should be doing things differently for the sake of our longevity on and off the job. If we can just rescue one of our brother or sister firefighters from preventable injury, illness, or disability, then we've done our job. Thanks for listening. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the Rescue One podcast. Today, we have Dena Ali. She's a battalion chief with the City of Raleigh Fire Department. 15 years on there, right, Chief? 15? Awesome. She has a master's in public administration from the University of North Carolina. And the cool part about that is there's a focus study there on understanding and preventing suicide, which is super important. And we're going to talk about that today. She also has a bachelor's in political science and government, and she's the director of the North Carolina Peer Support Team. I could add in a bunch of more stuff in there with your accolades, with a lot of the other things that you do. I noticed that you write a lot for Fire Engineering and Firehouse magazine, and you have articles that kind of, have a good range in there. You do stuff like sleep, how it provides good cancer prevention, a lot of suicide prevention, and leadership stuff. And I just kind of wanted to bring you on to talk about a little bit of all of that stuff. So welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into, the very end of all of that stuff, like the end result of all of the things that you've done, how did you get into the fire service?
The television show Rescue Me.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. I know it sounds absolutely crazy. So growing up, I always wanted to be a police officer. And I think this television show Cops had something to do with that, because I remember every Saturday night I was like glued to the TV, and I was just always just fascinated by public safety work. And I was drawn to law enforcement. And I think the reason for that is because I saw women in those roles. And I never considered the fire service because I didn't think it was for women. I didn't think women could do it or should do it. And then while I was a police officer, like twofold, I remember running calls with our fire department and just seeing how happy the guys were. And then one other thing is we would be dispatched to something absolutely crazy. It would already have happened, not much left to do, but as the law enforcement side, we'd have to secure the scene, remain on scene. The fire department would come in, and if they could do something, they'd do it and leave. If they couldn't do something, they'd be like, sorry, we got to go get ready for the next one. And I remember always being fascinated at the fact that like they actually arrived on scene and made a difference. Whereas I felt like on the law enforcement side, we got there after the thing happened, and there wasn't a lot of making a difference or intervention. So then that show Rescue Me came out, and in season 2, they had the female, and she seemed to fit in pretty good. And I was like, wait a minute, women can do this. And that just opened my eyes. And so next thing I knew, I was applying and got on the first time I applied at Raleigh and haven't looked back.
That's awesome. So that was the first place you applied?
Yeah, it's my hometown, born and raised in Raleigh.
So I know at least in South Florida, like people will, they'll apply to like 10 places, maybe one will call them, they'll go there, and then they may even end up leaving, 5 years into that to go somewhere else. I don't know if that's kind of how it is around the job, like where you are, but that's a pretty awesome thing to get on the first place. And especially it being your hometown. I actually have family in Cary, North Carolina. They're just outside, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so you grew up in Raleigh. After you got hired on, I know you were promoted to captain. How long were you on before you got promoted?
I made captain after 9 years.
Okay. So, like one of the questions that I kind of feel a lot of people ask, and I've heard people ask me, is how do you know when you're ready? Like I think there's this almost feeling of either imposter syndrome or lack of confidence when you've been on the job for a little while and you try to compare yourself to other people that are really respected in maybe your department or other departments, maybe people that you look up to, and they all have a ton of experience, or they all have a ton of charisma or intelligence or something about the job that you're trying to look for and emulate. And I think people always look at that and they go, how do I know when I have that thing or that? Because I think people look at an officer that they respect and love, and they'll say, what they find that one thing that makes that officer something special, and they go, when do I have that? So for you, kind of, what do you think, like, if you were giving advice to somebody that was coming up, when would you say, you're ready to be an officer when these things happen?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think anybody ever knows that they're ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of, man, I'm not ready. I shouldn't be doing this. And fortunately, I had really good mentors and people that I admired, people that I knew were the best of the best. I've been so lucky because I have gotten to work with literally the best of the best. One of the captains I still admire today, Cap Mizell. When I was brand new, he was the lieutenant on the ladder at the station I was at, and he was just passionate. He was that guy that like was the first one at the station every day, loved the job, always wanted to train, always tried to make other people better. And then later on in my career, he was my captain. We were on the same engine company. And I remember every call he knew how to handle. And he was really smooth, really good. I don't remember ever thinking like, man, he should have done it this way. Or, I don't ever remember second guessing or questioning his decision making. I just was in awe at his ability to be great. And so I didn't think I had any of that, and there'd be no reason for me to promote because I had so much work to do to get from where I was to where he was. But he was one of the people who kind of pushed me and was like, hey, we actually ended up getting transferred to a ladder company together. And while I was there, I was eligible for the lieutenant's test. And he literally told me if I didn't score in the top five, he was going to kick me off his company anyways. So he convinced me to study for the test and to do well. And I remember at the time I didn't think I was ready. I thought that there's so much more to learn. But now looking back and looking at the people around, I realized that I was more than ready. And the reason for that is I was engaged. We were training every day. We were always trying to get better. You mentioned before we started recording today that your podcast attracts more people in leadership roles than young firefighters. And I think part of that is I wasn't even aware of all of the contents of the fire service
Yeah.
until I got closer to like leadership. I didn't know about conferences or podcasts or, all this stuff until later in my career. And man, all these things would have been awesome when I was younger. So there are people who are smart and charismatic and young and they want to promote, but I guess I've learned it's not really my opinion. Everybody's running their own race, but if you're not engaged and you're not working to get yourself better every day, and you're not trying to learn something and not trying to learn how to deal with people, then you probably aren't ready.
Mm.
But if you come in and you focus, you spend your shift trying to perfect your craft and get better and stay in the books, somebody with 5 years experience doing that far exceeds somebody with 15 years experience who just, sits on the recliner and waits. That's my opinion.
Yeah. I think experience is important, because to some extent, you're just not going to be able to, like, one of the things you mentioned about that captain was they know how to handle every call. And I know that a lot of it is just going to be problem solving and common sense and good awareness. But, experience does come into play when it comes to recognizing big problems and safety and things like that. But it's not everything, right? You have to have the good traits that make a leader. And one of the articles you wrote was, I'm going to butcher the title, be a
Not knower.
not knower. I was like, no, not a know it all. No, not knower. Right. Love that article. It's about humility, and I think it's really important because, especially the newer generation, I run a youth program, like an Explorer program for our fire department, and it's kids between the ages of 14 and 21 that want to get in the fire service, and we meet every week, and my job is to try to prepare them for the fire service. So getting into EMT academies, and there's your cat, medic school,
Like
fire school. Yeah, he just a cameo and then he's out. And so I noticed that the way they respond to mentorship and leadership, it's basically only humility. If you do the standard fire academy thing where you yell them in their face, they immediately shut down. You won't get anywhere with them. But if you can break through to them in a humble way, they will outwork anybody because they believe in what you're doing and they respect you from a place of you genuinely caring about them. So the when I'm trying to promote officers within there, I try to tell them like, the rule number one is to genuinely care about your people. And I think like they start to notice that this is the generation that's coming up, right? Like these are the people that are going to be in the fire service next. When I read your article about, humility there, that's kind of where it resonated with me, because I've seen it personally with a younger generation. I know that that's like the most important thing is, don't come off as like a know-it-all. And also it allows them to feel more comfortable with being able to say, I don't know everything. And now you have somebody with an attitude to learn. I mean, that's going to promote like a culture of education in the firehouse. I love that. So if you guys haven't read that one, I think that one's on, is that on Fire Rescue Magazine? Yeah,
Fire
online.
Rescue one.
Yeah, but if you just Google Be a Not Knower, I'm going to put like a lot of stuff we talk about in the show notes so people can just click it, but that's a good one. So where did your path of leadership kind of like take you? So what made you want to go from captain to battalion chief? Because you were promoted to battalion chief last year, right?
Yeah, about 6 months ago.
Okay, awesome.
So still fresh white gear and a fresh white helmet.
And trying to dirty it up.
Yeah. It's actually the last couple of months. I don't know what's going on in Raleigh, but our fire prevention, we're gonna have to talk to them because they're not very successful, but I'm not complaining.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things you're like, oh, I don't mind going to this. I know we've kind of been, our fires have been up, which is, typically they were trending down, but yeah. So what kind of led you to make that move?
Me and my personality, and it's interesting. I feel like I'm on a generational like transition because people hired before me and the generations right before me were slow to promote. And I remember I made captain. I enjoyed it. I did it for 5 years before making battalion chief, but I was excited for that next step, and I had support in going for that next step. And initially, I was like, man, am I ready? Like, am I too inexperienced for this? But what I'm seeing is a lot of people from the academy before mine and my academy and the academies after mine, they're also promoting quickly. And I don't know if it's just a change in the generation. I'm not sure, but I always am drawn to challenges. And I guess that's probably what brought me to the fire service and probably what brought me to law enforcement is I'm always just drawn to challenges and I enjoy being challenged. And while I, loved riding an engine, I right before I got promoted, I literally was on probably I was on one of the best crews. I had one of the best crews. We were the busiest engine in the city. It was a blast until I got a little burned out. I'm not even gonna lie there. With being the busiest engine comes a little bit of burnout. But, the opportunity to promote to battalion chief was another challenge. And I'm just really grateful that I did it because right now I feel like I'm thriving in it. And I literally like look forward to work every day. I enjoy running a fire scene. I just love it. Like I'm at the point still where, like when you're new and you don't want to take a day off because you don't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
I'm at that point where like I'm like, oh man, I don't want to take this day off. And or when I am off, like last week I was at the National Fire Academy. On the days that I was working, like I had my first due on. So every time, my car got dispatched, I was seeing it and I was going to open megahertz and listening like, God, I hope I am not missing anything. But yeah, I think it's just being drawn to the challenge. And I'm seeing that again, if you continue to stay engaged, stay on top of your craft, you can be successful as you promote.
It's like you're getting a new job, I mean, it's like a whole different thing. I'm a lieutenant right now. I'm about to be promoted to captain in what's today? In like 10 shifts. I got a couple months left. Yeah, it's I'm thrilled, like absolutely thrilled, but I'm also really apprehensive as to like what the challenges are that I don't know yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lieutenant in my department, we have our ambulances, we call them rescues. They're a 3-person. We carry fire gear on them. And when we go to fire scenes, the first do rescue will go and do inside vent and search, and the second do rescue do outside vent. So we function as truck companies when we're on a scene. We have like 8 stations. We're a smaller department in South Florida, which is kind of how most of these places run. But a captain is in charge of a suppression unit. You'll either be assigned to an engine or a quint. So the fire side obviously is more prominent, right? Because we're still running medicals. We're not transporting, but more so being in charge of a firehouse and trying to, I guess, deal with the personalities on a more grand level and some of the stuff that happens. Because prior to that, I just have to worry about my 2 guys on the truck. And then now I'm worried about, sometimes 10 people in the firehouse.
Yeah.
So I think like some of that is part of the apprehension where I'm like, all right, what am I in for here? And I think like that's probably another thing that people wonder is, if you're trying to promote, going from a position where, and I've said this to my guys that are thinking about becoming a lieutenant, because a lieutenant on my department is a much harder job than firefighter. And captain, everyone thinks is a little bit easier than lieutenant, but it has so much more responsibility. And I'm like, the thing about going from firefighter to a position of leadership, this is the way I would try to tell people: you're sacrificing some fun of the job because it's not as fun anymore. I'm going to be completely honest. You lose a little bit of fun, you lose a little bit of tool time, but you are gaining more fulfillment, in what you can do for your crew. So I think you have the potential to take on more responsibility for how you can impact the firehouse and maybe even build the crew and what the culture can be on your own. But it's a little bit more stress. It's a little bit more on your shoulders. You can take, work home with you a little more. From a company officer level to the battalion level, how much does that magnify? Does that get twice as bad? Are you having way less fun, or is it just a different kind of fun?
Well, like I said, it's fun, but
Yeah,
you're right, because now you're responsible for an entire battalion. And for me, I think one of the things that I enjoy the most about it is, as a battalion chief, like I get to take care of people, and I don't know why, like I enjoy that, but I really do. I enjoy being helpful and useful, and helping people like thrive and have what they need to succeed. It's cool, but with that, there's the stress of recognizing that the people I'm responsible for are my captains, not my drivers and not my firefighters. I mean, I'm responsible for all of them, but the ones that I can affect change on, or the ones that I communicate with, are the captains. And sometimes the greatest challenge is maybe, when I see what, in my opinion, is, firefighters that are not receiving all that they need to succeed, and having to find ways to help communicate that to the captain, like talking about generations. It doesn't matter. Like, people want to be respected. And me being a female and being a bit younger, I'm not going to go in there and be like, hey, captain, you're an idiot. You're doing it wrong. Like, get it right. I can't do that. I don't have that. Whereas, maybe some of the chiefs I worked for could do that. They could walk in and be like, hey, fix it. I've got to, communicate in a way that hopefully like inspires them to want to change. And that is a challenge. But again, I think I like problem solving, where in the moment of the challenge, it's like, oh, this really sucks, because how am I going to achieve this? But then when you start to see what you want happen without you even like telling them like, this is exactly what I want, but with you just trying to help guide, it's such a cool feeling. And that for me has been one of the neatest parts, is communicating expectations. Or luckily, the battalion chief that ran this battalion before me, he had monthly battalion training. And I found that if there is something I see that we're not doing well, if I present it as an upcoming training opportunity and assign it to one of the captains, it's a way to get the whole battalion to improve and to have them improve each other, if that makes any sense. And that's been kind of cool.
Yeah. One thing about that I always wonder about the battalion position. So every department's so different, like longtime friend of mine, childhood friend that was in the Explorer program with me when we were teenagers. He actually moved to New York and he got on the FDNY. He works in Brooklyn and he works in the 15th Battalion. He's in Flatbush. So he's on Engine 281, which is in the New York City Fire Department. Flatbush they're very busy and they're extremely well respected. And his description, like if you ask him, like when I ask him about the other firehouses, he's like, yeah, my firehouse, his uncle worked on that engine. Is kind of a legacy thing. And he said, it's a very well respected firehouse. I'm really lucky to get in there. The battalion chief never comes by. Like that's in New York City. They're like, oh yeah, if you're really well respected, they leave you alone,
Oh.
And I think I don't know if that's good or bad. Like in my department, we have a lot of battalion chiefs that we have 2 battalions in my department, and they'll try to stop by once a shift just to talk with everybody or just to say hello or whatever, grab coffee and just be around. They don't want us to feel like they're just kind of, gone. So I don't know how your department is, but I would wonder in that position, what's the fair assessment of that? You don't want to be seem like a babysitter where you have to make people, know that you trust them to do their job, but also, you don't want to just be like absentee either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was funny. My last battalion chief was awesome. He's one of the best. And he didn't stop by a lot. And he was like, yeah, firefighters don't want their chief stopping by. But all of us on my crew, myself included, like, we love this guy. He was awesome. And we would be like, no, we like it when you stop by. We like talking to you. We like asking you questions. We like hearing your opinion. And this guy, go find something else. um, but so for me, I think, and I try really hard to get a feel for people. I will tell you this as a battalion chief that I'm struggling with is trying to determine if people are being authentic or if they're just being polite because I'm the chief. And that's one of my greatest challenges. Like, I try to read people and try to determine how they feel. But from my battalion right now, they all seem to enjoy when I come by, not like for me, but because they have questions. Hey, what's the department doing with this? What are your thoughts on this? Hey, this is something that we're experiencing. What do you think about this? And so I make a point to get to, all of my stations at least once a cycle. But if I go by our shop every day, because that's where if somebody puts in a request, they'll put it in a basket. So I go by every day. And if a certain station has something in the basket, I deliver it to them. So there have been some cycles where I've gone to the same station every day because somehow every day they've had something in the basket. And of course, I'll talk crap like, dude, what are y'all doing?
Right.
But, I liked it when our chief came by because he was a good chief. He cared about us. He wasn't out to get us. Now, I have worked for chiefs that when they showed up, nobody liked them showing up because they were looking for something wrong, looking for something to criticize. They were negative. And so I think that's like the key to it is, if you're showing up to take care of your crews and you're not showing up to like manage them, they probably like it when you come by. Because again, people have questions and people want to know what's going on above them. And the rumor mill is always big. So I'll stop by, and sometimes, just by stopping by, I'll hear a rumor and I'll have to go ask my boss, and he'll be like, oh yeah, we're doing that. And I'm like, wow, how does it get down there before it even comes down the chain?
Yeah.
So that I try not to just randomly show up, but when they have something in the box, I'll show up. And then of course, if by the end of the cycle I haven't seen them yet because there wasn't anything to deliver, I'll make a point to go by just to make sure they know, like, hey, do you need anything?
Did they move your shift when you got promoted from captain to battalion?
And it wasn't, we used to have a rule where you had to move shifts, but now it is literally spot for spot. So if the spot that's open is on my shift, I would go to that.
Gotcha. So when you move shifts, I mean, how many people are in your department?
Online, it's 555.
Yeah. So that's pretty big. Like, we're 250, just under 250. So it's like, it's big, it's small enough to where you know everybody, but you're not like very familiar with everybody. There could be a lot of people that you've never worked with or you don't work with much. When you got moved, did you know the people that you were working with for the most part?
So I actually stayed in the battalion I was working in and then moved shifts. So, for example, the person I had shift change with, I'm now his captain.
Gotcha.
Or his battalion chief.
Right.
We used to be equals. So there were some that I'd known of, but didn't really know. But several I knew.
Do you think that's valuable? Like, moving? Because I've read both ways. Like, the buddy to boss thing is kind of tricky. I think once you're already an officer, it's probably easier to move upward and have to move into that higher leadership position. But I think if you get the opportunity to start fresh, it presents its own challenges, But I think it can also, I don't know, like, people might test you, they don't know you. People might push the envelope a little more. Or you just might have the unknown, you don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah, I think people are going to challenge you if that's what they want to do. And it doesn't matter if you know them or you don't know them. The people who are just trying to do a good job, they're going to do a good job if you know them or you don't know them. So I think no matter what, there's going to be a challenge there. I think I've been incredibly fortunate. The battalion that I got promoted to was hands down one of the best battalions in the city. The company officers all very experienced, but not just that, they all care. They care about the job. They care about their people. They want to do a good job. So literally, I got to step into a battalion that was high performing, and all I had to do was support them and allow them to keep doing what they're doing. But I do know, I mean, there are some captains that I would not want to lead because I know that they would make it a lot more challenging. And I've just been fortunate, which I'm grateful for, because maybe by the time I get one of those people, I'll have a little more time under the belt. So they will be easier to manage.
Yeah, I think like that's probably going to be the case in any position you go into, right? I mean, firefighter all the way up to chief, there are people that are tougher to manage than others. For people that are trying to get in any position of leadership within the fire service, I know you're an avid reader. What books would you recommend that somebody who's yeah, there you go. If you guys aren't watching the podcast and you're listening, Chief has a bookshelf with quite a few shelves full. And I know probably a lot of those aren't fire service. They're probably, fiction, nonfiction, but any book that you would recommend or books that you would recommend for new fire service leaders?
Wow, so many.
Yeah.
So I think one thing is, of course, find something that like grabs you, because that is one thing that I've noticed is you have to figure out what inspires you and what you're interested in, and that will make you keep reading the book. Because I've had people recommend books and I'm like, oh, wow, I can't get into this. So with that being said, of course, Frank Viscuso's books are all incredible. I think Step Up and Lead is like his most popular book.
Yeah.
But I liked Step Up Your Teamwork better than that one. It was just more relatable and easier for me, like as a leader, to think of ideas. He's got a new book out on Amazon, which is actually way more affordable. It's only $20. And I don't know why the title is just, oh, it's Flashpoint. Of course, it's his podcast, Flashpoint. That's a really good book. Corley Moore's new book, The 9 L's of Leadership. And that book is absolutely amazing. And I think every new officer needs to like read that first. I loved 5 Alarm Leadership. It was Rick Lasky and John Salka together. That was a really good book. And the audio version was actually, I enjoyed the Audible version as well. There's one on the tip of my tongue, and I don't know why. It just evaded me. If you're trying to like do well in assessment center and then well performing in the role, Chief Anthony Castro's, he's got his Mastering the Fire Service Assessment Center book.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good. The second edition expands beyond just like how to test into, he goes over the NIOSH 5, and he has people from all over the fire service that give stories and input. So I found that one to be just absolutely fascinating. And then, of course, I've got most of Chief Dunn's books on building construction. Trying to look over there and make sure I don't miss anything that just, John Zalka's book, First In, Last Out.
Mm-hmm.
It was written in 2003. But it is just so relevant. And he talks about a few things that you can't get that content anywhere else. Like he had a really good chapter on evaluations.
Yeah.
And this one was recently recommended to me, and I'm glad. The Culture Code. It really talks about like building psychological safety in teams. It's a really, really good book.
And that's not a firefighter, right? I haven't heard of that one. Culture Code.
No, it's not. Ryan Selleck with the Young Officers on Fire. He was like, I cannot believe you haven't read that yet. And when I got it and read it, I was like, I cannot believe I haven't read that yet. It's really good. Where I got the idea to write that article, Be a Not Knower, actually came from Amy Edmondson's book, Fearless Organizations. It's a book about psychological safety. And it was fascinating. Really interesting concept, and interesting the way she wrote it. One last book. So you got me.
This is really good. People want multiple books to read. You know what I mean? They want a list.
I actually walked by it earlier. Adam Grant's book, Think Again.
Mm-hmm.
So good. And it's Adam Grant. If you've never read his work or listened to any of his podcasts, he's an amazing thinker. He's an organizational psychologist, but he speaks on very current, relevant topics. He's younger, so he's really engaging. But his book, Think Again, just talks about how when you kind of get stuck in the way you do things, or organizations get stuck in the way they do things, how you miss opportunities and how you can fail. And so that book went across so many topics. And it was just absolutely fascinating to read. Actually, right now in the EFO program, we have to write a lot of papers. And every paper I have cited a chapter out of Think Again.
So that's a good one then.
Yeah, it's very good. I highly recommend that one.
Cool. So all those books we're going to have in the show notes. And I mean, you guys can find them wherever. I'm sure they're all on Amazon or, if you audio or just the old fashioned version, but we'll get all that in there. A lot of that brings me to my second part of this that I want to talk about, which is mental health. I know you talked a lot about a lot of those books you just mentioned were written by psychologists, and I think there's a really interesting component to leadership that I didn't understand and still don't understand fully, but I'm learning consistently is the psychology of the people that you're around. Just the simple fact of motivating people is understanding psychology, and trying to get what they find valuable or what motivates them or why they're there, and to try to, foster that and to inspire them to do things, whether it's just the culture, this fire service, or running calls. I mean, training, anything. But with that, I think comes a lot of complex stuff, and specifically just the general concept of mental health, for the fire service. I think, I've listened to a lot of your stuff. You and I are on the same page where I think we're doing a lot better with talking about mental health in general. And the last few guests I've had on the podcast, we've kept, we brought up this question, and I like to hear everybody's opinion on it. But we're talking about mental health now more than I've seen in my 14 years on, and I haven't seen the numbers for suicides declining, and I'm wondering, what are we missing? Is there a correlation that we know of that we could be missing something? Like, we're talking about it more, but we haven't really impacted the suicide numbers yet. Is that accurate?
Maybe. And this is why. So in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, suicide was really a taboo subject. And if somebody in your family died by suicide, it brought shame to your family. And I think a lot of us, if we think back, we can remember, if somebody mentioned that they were suicidal, or think about early in your career when you went on calls of somebody who was suicidal, we didn't respond to those calls with compassion. We responded to those calls as if we were responding to like a crazy person that was wasting our time, and we had to go out there and, if you really want to do it, you would have done it. I remember on the truck hearing that over and over again. If they really want to do it, they would have done it.
Yeah. So
suicide, historically taboo subject, and for the first responder community, especially taboo and stigmatized. So what we know from research and data is probably before about 2018, if a first responder died by suicide, we could not guarantee that they would have been reported as dying by suicide. There's some research that has come out where, and I'm trying to remember the author of the article, and I can't right now, but folks have done research on law enforcement officers and firefighters, more so on the law enforcement side. But what they found is more often than not that when a law enforcement officer died by suicide, their coworkers or the fire service thought they were helping them by listing their cause of death as unknown, or even, maybe cardiac in nature, but, listing it differently. And when Dr. Savia did research on North Carolina firefighters, she literally pulled every death certificate of every firefighter over a 15-year period and looked at every single death certificate. And what she found interesting was there were a lot of death certificates that were sealed confidential. And we can only speculate that confidential ones may have been things like suicide or overdose. And that's why they were sealed as confidential. So all that's to say is the data has never been accurate. And when we tend to speculate on the data, and for some reason, I don't know why, when we speculate, we try to over exaggerate the numbers. But I think today we're seeing more firefighter suicides, more law enforcement suicides, because people aren't ashamed when somebody dies by suicide. People are more willing to honor people who've died by suicide and honor their cause of death so that we can address it. But more importantly, it's not a fire service or emergency service problem. It is a public health crisis. Suicides in the United States have been trending upwards since 1999. They've gone up 35%. They took a dip in 2020, which was fascinating because a lot of people thought that COVID was going to make them shoot upwards, but they actually, there was a dip. So suicide's a public health crisis. And one piece that I think we're missing in emergency services is that it's not the bad calls always. Most of us sign up for this for the bad calls. Most of us want to save lives, want to be a part of something big. We expect them. Not
Yeah.
saying that they don't affect us, because they do, especially when they involve children or involve people that remind us of people that we love or involve our own. Yeah, the bad calls screw with us, but it's so much more than that. We're human just like everybody else, and we face struggles like everybody else. But for some reason, we tend to suppress those struggles out of, humiliation or, I think one of the things that Dr. Sabia found in 2007 that's still relevant today is when we're being bothered by something and it's affecting us, if it's not like a big call or not a big loss, we think that maybe it's not worthy of bringing up because, like, I can't believe this is bothering me when this person's going through this. And so we'll silence those little traumas, not realizing that by silencing them, we're just allowing them to, grow unsupported.
I wrote down a quote from one of your articles that I think fits in here. And it was, I'll actually bring up two. One was that you said, with good sleep, a good social network, and good coping skills, most people will not develop long-term PTSD. And the other one that you wrote was 80% of people diagnosed with PTSD will recover. So with those things, I mean, like the sleep thing, I know we can do an entire episode on this. And guys, if you're listening and I don't want to harp too much on the things that Chief Ali has said, because I think probably the weekly scrap, both of those, there's two episodes, both of them go into these things like immensely, and they're really, really well done. Go check those out. Plus, I really like the way Corley asks questions. I think he's really good at that. We won't hammer too much and be redundant, but that content is really well out there. But I do want to touch on it a little bit because I feel like, what I want to focus on is we know kind of what some of the problems are. I want to see, maybe get opinions on what big steps we can do right now to kind of solve them. And that means people need to be proactive and not just, I'm on the peer support team, so I feel very strongly about peer support, but you mentioned in a perfect world, we would not have peer support at all. It wouldn't even be around. People should perform those actions at a company level just because you're in this job for the brotherhood and you're right next to the person day in and day out. You can do all the things that a peer support member can do. And I really like that. So if you want to be proactive, obviously take care of yourself and set yourself up for success with, the future of your mental health. But also if you're standing next to somebody, know that these are the steps. So good sleep, that's a whole conversation we get into. But what about the social network and coping skills? As far as those two things, can you talk about what a good social network is and what good coping skills would be?
Absolutely. And I love the way you phrase that. And I love that you're looking at, okay, let's not talk about the problem. Let's talk about solutions. Because I think when we keep going down the path of the problem and amplifying it, for some reason, people want to armor up and, they think that putting that messaging out is helpful. But in my opinion, what's more helpful is, how do we take care of ourselves and each other? How do we model that so that we can be more resilient and hopefully not see these negative outcomes? So I'm actually kind of excited right now because my research is kind of gone down a path where we found, at least I think, and I'm going to pursue it further. It's kind of neat how the timing is coming, because the last class at EFO is literally you research something. And so this is what I want to research. But what I found is, by studying heart rate variability, the technical term is the polyvagal theory, that is a biomarker that can predict emotional resilience. Ryan Muncie calls it emotional bandwidth. So heart rate variability is a biomarker just like heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, something you can measure. And we have the power to affect it through our daily actions. And with that is through our coping skills. So in order to increase your heart rate variability, you have to actually spend more time resting. And that doesn't mean you increase your heart rate variability by like resting all the time. Athletes were some of the first people to study heart rate variability. What they found is high performing athletes, the ones that were going out there pushing themselves in training, in order to be able to continue to push themselves further, they actually had to spend more time recovering after training. And they found ways that would help them recover in ways that would improve their heart rate variability. And, it's like ice baths, breathing exercises, more sleep. So the Stephen Porges, he's kind of like the leader researching polyvagal theory. He started to draw that connection to emotional resilience. And then other people have kind of taken on that. And they found just like athletes can improve their physical performance by improving their heart rate variability, people, especially people who have stressful occupations, can improve their emotional resilience by improving their heart rate variability. And it's basically any activity that activates your parasympathetic nervous system and pulls you out of fight or flight will increase your heart rate variability. And what I like about that is there are so many different ways to do that. So, I might say, these are the things I do and you should do them. But the truth is, let's each find what works for us. And it's so cool because there's this whole platter of ways to improve heart rate variability. And these are all things that over time we've researched and found are protective factors. You mentioned like support networks. Having a strong support network improves heart rate variability because when you are with people who you trust and you're able to be your true authentic self, your defenses shut off, your body relaxes, and you get to be yourself. So, I think I've said this in almost every podcast and probably beat it to death. Like, we're pack animals. No person can go it alone or survive on their own. We need each other to thrive. And what we need more than each other is just people that allow us to be ourselves, allow us to say what's on our mind, allow us to, share our struggles. So that support network is huge. Having somebody that you are not afraid to say, man, I'm struggling, or man, I screwed this up. Just so absolutely incredibly important to have. And then the activities you can do, such an awesome range from journaling to gratitude, ice baths, cold showers, sleeping. I've been reading Stuart Brown's work on play. He's a play researcher. There's a good book called Play It Away, and then another book called Play. But in those books, he just talks about the importance of play. And there's just a direct relationship between play and heart rate variability that us as firefighters and first responders, we spend a lot of our careers working harder and not wanting to be lazy. But if we actually incorporate play into our lives every day, our days on duty, our days off duty, it allows us to be more resilient and to be able to handle more stress. And I just love reading that and just recognizing its importance. With it comes like laughter and humor and how helpful that is. So all that to say is I've been so excited just researching this and recognizing that we've got to incorporate things that just relax us. And when we do that, it's going to allow us to take on more. And Ryan Muncie, I think he just says it best. He says it increases our emotional bandwidth. If you're always just reacting and entering stressful situations, you're eventually going to run out of capacity. But if you build in some slack and build in some capacity, you'll be able to continue to respond. And just like athletes who recover and take care of their bodies are able to perform at high levels, if we recover and take care of our minds and bodies, we'll be able to perform at high levels and respond to things that are really difficult.
This makes a lot of sense. First of all, that's a really fascinating. I like research and studying stuff. The CBD side for me is just a playground of information because it's always coming out. There's always stuff every few months that's coming out now. So I like reading published research. I haven't heard anything about that. This is a little outside of what I normally read. So heart rate variability can't just basically, if you wanted to be proactive and you're a firefighter, it sounds like these things could be worked on consistently, throughout your career. And it's funny, but you have to like work at your hobbies or relaxation or something that's going to do that.
Yeah.
So what does play like include? Does that count like watching Netflix? Or does this have to be something that you're actively engaged in? Do you have to be on a boat fishing?
So the recommendation for play is something that when you're doing, you lose track of time.
Got it.
And there is a caution about like, sitting in front of Netflix and vegging out to TV isn't quite play. But if there is something on the television or some series that you thoroughly enjoy and you're engaged with while watching, that is a form of play.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be careful because I think we can be really exhausted sometimes and turn on the TV and really not even be aware of what's on. I've gone back and rewatched stuff that I've seen before, and I'm like, wow, this is all new to me. How did I
Yeah.
miss it?
In my head, I'm like, I don't want to tell people how many times I've rewatched the series The Office. It's an uncomfortable amount. It's probably in the triple digits. I'm not going to lie, the whole series,
But that
because it's
series is
background
probably
noise.
play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh
Well,
no.
it's like, well, like it's background noise, So like sometimes it's just on because for me, my mind is like very spooled up all the time. And I play a few different instruments. So like I can sometimes like disengage, but for the most part, if I wanted to unwind, I'll watch The Office. Like I haven't picked up my guitar in a long time because I'm always engaged doing other stuff. I'm probably not the poster child for engaging in play, except, I try to like take vacations and stuff. We have a good schedule at work, but that's kind of where I was going was, if you work at a busy company, what you're describing and people not engaging in that, in what this play allows for, this like emotional resilience, is that basically just a way of saying that you're getting burnt out? Like the lack of emotional resilience or the lack of play is going to be burnout.
Absolutely. And I actually literally just read this. The quote was, "The opposite of play is depression."
Hmm.
And that's the opposite of it. But the quote was far more articulate than that. But I thought it was just so absolutely fascinating that in order to stay healthy, like we need play. And
Yeah.
again, play is any activity that you do, and while you're doing it, you just lose track of time
Yeah.
because you're enjoying it. And one of the authors on it, where he started playing, it was just as an adult playing catch for
Yeah.
15 minutes and just realized that brought him back like nostalgia to his youth, and was able to just relax. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So watching the game on Sunday, or some people just going for a walk, like first thing in the morning. That's very relaxing for some people. In South Florida, it's 85 degrees and 85% humidity, like, I don't know, 10 months out of the year. So like walking, sometimes is more of a exercise than it is enjoyment. But um the idea that you have that like, one thing, and it doesn't, from what you're saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be like something physical, but it can be like a workout. It can be somebody going on a boat, but it also probably could be like, there are some, like, I love history. I could sit down and watch a show about history and I would truly enjoy that. I would lose track of time. That could be the thing. But if you look at it like prevention or being proactive, trying to reduce burnout and trying to reduce those things, I think that's an important thing that we should look at as a tool for firefighters. And I would imagine the younger you are, the probably better it is. What's that? You got the quote? You found it?
Yes.
What do you got?
The opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression.
Is
And I
not
thought that
work.
was, and then on top of that, he said, play is called recreation because it makes us new again. It recreates us and our world. When we play, dilemmas and challenges will naturally filter through the unconscious mind and work themselves out. It's not at all uncommon for people to come back not only re energized, but also with fresh ideas for work. So it's just so fascinating,
Yeah.
all the good that can come out of play. But I like that. The opposite of play is not work, but it's depression.
I think that a lot of people probably answers a bunch of questions for them. I think that, especially like I said, I just keep thinking about people on a really busy truck. I've been on busy trucks before. I know you've been on busy trucks. If you come home and you're beat, the first thing you do is go to sleep, or if you're working a lot and your sleep gets robbed, then, your energy levels go down and you kind of go into this cycle where it's probably easy to get into a state where you're just constantly revolving around work or getting ready for work. And I know that that's burnout is like a complex thing, but I know that that's that's probably a huge part of it, is just your lack of, from what how you described it, your lack of emotional resilience. It makes sense why people on really busy companies, if they have home life problems, they're very susceptible to mental health issues or severe depression, or not to mention, like, I know you've mentioned him before. I love Matt Walker. I think the book Why We Sleep is amazing. But one things that always just sticks out to me, that I always remember over and over again, is that there is no mental illness without a sleep component, like every single one, and it makes sense why it's like, okay, so one call is not going to be the sole reason for PTSD, but it is a component. And those usually happen with problems at home or previous traumas or lack of sleep and other stresses. And it's like, you throw all these things in a blender, and it's just, it makes total sense. So is the thought that maybe we can resist all those things a little bit more if we have proactive things like you said, those coping mechanisms, emotional resilience, trying to get better sleep, taking care of yourself, having those social networks, being proactive means having all those things, and we can resist that. Is that the idea?
I think so. And in his book Tribe, have you read that one
No,
by Sebastian Younger? Check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it.
I've heard about it many times, but no,
Yeah,
never
you and
read
I
it.
seem to be on the same page with books. So Tribe is good and it's an easy read, but he calls PTSD a disorder of recovery. And he lays out the case for that. And the case he lays out matches the work of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. So whereas Sebastian Younger is a war reporter, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk is a psychologist. And it's fascinating that this war reporter was able to lay out like the exact same work, research ideas as like the psychological community. But he called PTSD a disorder of recovery and explained it doesn't happen in a vacuum, that when we have strong support networks, when we can take care of ourselves, we will be able to respond to trauma better. And he also describes and demonstrates the fact that when you think of all the clusters that are listed with PTSD, initially in their own, they're all normal responses. Depression actually, like when you are in an area where there's danger, being depressed is a way to conserve energy. Hypervigilance is actually positive because, of course, when you're in a threatening environment, you want to be aware of what's around you. Nightmares are actually adaptive because it's a memory. But these things aren't supposed to last forever. And that's why he calls it a disorder of recovery. They're normal responses. They protect us and they should subside as long as you have good sleep. So you know this REM sleep, it processes events and separates the emotional response from the memory. But without REM sleep, that emotional response is tied to it. And that's what leads to those signs and symptoms of PTSD. So that book was really fascinating. That's like one of the greatest things I've taken away is if we are going to work in careers where we may be exposed to trauma, if we're going to be on busy companies, we have to be extra aggressive about taking care of ourselves, ensuring we have strong support networks, knowing simple things like journaling. I found it really fascinating to learn how healthy journaling is. And they've studied it for physical and mental health. And what was really fascinating is learning that journaling is a way of processing events. And you don't have, like, when I was younger, I used to write a lot of negative stuff. Like if I had a bad day, if I was frustrated, I'd write it down. And I remember looking into my journal from my teenage years and my early 20s and being kind of disappointed that it was a lot of negative. So I vowed to never write negative again. And so my journals were always positive. Well, later on, as I'm studying all of this, I realized that that was a coping skill. Like writing about negative events actually helped process. And it's recommended, and you don't have to save it. You can write about something negative and then you can burn it. But the simple act of writing can actually help process.
I think that's big for people trying to fall asleep where your mind is reeling too. Take that journal, write down all the things that are bothering you, set it aside. I've read that's a good tactic. And I try to do that if I have a lot going on, I'll even just something as just saying, I'm going to take care of this tomorrow, just so you know the loop is closed. But also, having that idea that there are things to be grateful for every day and having gratitude that you can write down. That's extremely important. And it helps you find some of the niceties, that maybe go overlooked sometimes. It kind of opens your eyes to this other amount of things that occur to you all throughout the day that are worth being grateful for, like pets.
Yeah. No, he's
like
usually
like your
awesome.
buddy.
So
I
I think he's jealous of you right now.
think he's
Um,
been very patient this whole time.
yeah, yeah, gratitude. I've been researching that and just finding how valuable it is. And
Yeah.
one of the things I've recognized and experienced is when you do make a daily practice to express gratitude and to truly think of what am I grateful for today, instead of every day saying the same things. I'm grateful I woke up. I'm grateful I have a job, whatever. But actually meant to really dive deep into what you're grateful for and just try to come up with something different every day. It's amazing how when you are exposed to negative, you won't be overcome by it because you have that daily practice of gratitude, and it will help you see that there still is good. But I think when we don't make that a practice, when those bad things do happen, it's really hard to see the light.
Yeah, it is. You're just kind of buried behind all the other stuff that it's almost like you're not doing it to yourself, but you're not helping yourself at all, like see through some of those other things because you're just kind of, behind the eight ball. You're setting yourself up for failure. I want to take all the stuff that you said and put it in the show notes. I do want people to be able to reach out to you and find you if they need you, if they want to follow any of your stuff. I actually would say go to your LinkedIn. There's all the articles that you've written. Obviously, the two shows that I said on the weekly scrap, those are really worth listening to. And I didn't want to repeat a lot of those things on here, although everything on there is extremely valuable, but I'm not going to ask the questions and summarize it better than you guys already did. So I would recommend everybody go, and just in general, the weekly scrap is just it's a really good podcast. You guys should listen to that one. So where's a good place for people to reach out to you? I know you're on Instagram, right? And your LinkedIn, anything else?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's probably one of the best ways. I'm on Facebook,
Perfect.
but I, Facebook has just gotten really overwhelming.
Yeah.
And
I'm never on there.
I used to accept all friend requests, and then it just got too much because I would be like, I don't even know this person.
Yeah.
So it's overwhelming. So I think LinkedIn's probably the best, in my opinion. And then of course Instagram, I get a lot of messages through there, which works out too.
Cool. When do you finish your work on the with the EFO?
I signed up for an April class, so that would be the third class, and then the final one is the big research project, which is like a 12-week mediated course that follows up with the research. I don't want to rush it
Yeah.
because I actually want to do a really good job with the research. So I know a lot of people are going to try to like rush it, but I'm hoping that I'll work on that this fall and maybe have that research done next spring. I actually am lucky because through all of this work, I've gotten to meet some amazing people. And I messaged Allison Brager. I don't know if you ever heard of her. She's a sleep researcher. She also works with O2X. She's done some pretty good podcasts. She's amazing.
I
Um,
know of her through O2X. Yeah.
yeah, we probably need to get her on this show. She'd be great. But she currently is looking at heart rate variability and suicide. And
Hmm.
so I just messaged her yesterday, letting her know like what I wanted to research. And then I connected with Dr. Sarah Jenke, who does a lot of research for the fire service. And I think we're gonna like kind of get together and try to produce something useful. And I'm like absolutely excited about
That's
it.
very exciting. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Well, I really look forward to reading that when it comes out. And thank you for everything that you've done for the fire service, especially for mental health, but also just, just being a good example and being a good officer and having that as a thing that people can look at and try to learn from. A lot of the people that come on here, I try to, just let them talk about their experiences because I think other people find it valuable. They can relate. They can, see where other people have been and learn how to, take a little bit from what they've done and apply it to themselves and move on. So, it's been really cool having you, and we'll have this up soon. And I'm really looking forward to all the stuff that people will have to say, on the positive comments and all the sharing that will get done. I think talking about mental health is extremely important, but it's really important that we talk about solutions. So, guys, please be proactive, take care of each other, and be safe out there.